The night my husband's lover kissed me first. Hook, the cufflink was not ours. It was heavier than it needed to be, a small moon of polished steel with the initials AS engraved so cleanly I could feel the serif with my thumb. I found it in a bowl by the door, sitting on our keys like a dare. Next to it, folded with the kind of care neither of us had been spending on each other, was a receipt from the rooftop bar at the Hamilton, 2 martinis, 1 plate of olives, 1 room charge to 812, timestamp 10:22 p.m. My husband's handwriting, tidy, teacher neat, ran down the margin where the print ended. If you want the truth, come thirsty. My name is Joel, 35, professional breath holder. I write the kind of copy that promises futures inside subscription boxes and then go home and forget where we put our present. My husband is Nico. He teaches architecture studio and can make 15 freshmen believe that angles are a form of devotion. We've been married long enough to have our favorite spoon, not long enough to stop auditioning for each other's approval. Lately, the apartment had become a well-lit stage where we hit all our marks and left all our lines unspoken. At 10:04, I pressed the Hamilton's elevator button as if I could pin the night to a floor. The elevator knew better than to hurry. The roof garden was a quiet geometry of glass, soft lighting, and people who looked like their own alibis. The bartender watched me approach the corner with an expression that said he had seen everything twice. At the end of the bar, a man, tall, beautiful in the way expensive mistakes are, looked up from his glass with a smile that arrived before his eyes did. He touched the empty stool next to him like an invitation. "You're late," he said, and his voice was practiced nonchalance. "I was wondering if you'd keep this old receipt as a souvenir of my poor judgment." "I'm looking for my poor judgment," I said. "He's usually wearing a wedding band." His mouth twitched. Then we might be seeing the same ghost from opposite ends of the room. He extended a hand as if we were at a charity opening and not a cliff. "Adrian." "AS." The cufflink echoed against my palm like tiny thunder. I didn't shake his hand. He didn't retract it, simply let it rest on the bar long enough for me to feel the warmth of his certainty. He had the kind of face that gets forgiven in advance. I felt an urge to catalog him, watchband, cologne, a faint smear of graphite at his cuff as if he'd been drawing. Nico came home with that mark sometimes, the ghost of a studio across his wrist. "You're Nico's husband," Adrian said softly, as if he'd found the page he was looking for. "I'm not a friend you've met." "Not yet," I said, which tasted like someone else's line. I set the cufflink on the bar between us and watched it decide which of us it belonged to. He looked at the initials and didn't flinch. "He forgot that," he said. "He was nervous. He doesn't look nervous, does he? That's one of his tricks." "He has more than one," I said. Adrian laughed, a light sound like the ice shifting in his glass. "I should tell you to leave. I should tell you I'll be the villain so you can go home and be the hero. But it turns out I don't want to tell either of us a story that flat." He put his thumb on the cufflink and pushed it toward me. He asked me to come up, to talk about how love and hunger use the same verb and whose fault that is. I said yes because it felt like the kind of danger that keeps you awake for good reasons. In a different life, I would have been noble. In this one, I ordered a martini. The bartender didn't ask which gin, he had already chosen. The first sip was clarity. The second was permission. "What's your plan?" I asked. "I don't have the right to one," Adrian said. "I have an appetite to manage and a boundary that looks good on paper. I told him if he wanted to shatter anything, he should bring the hammer himself." "You told him to invite me," I said. "I told him that if he wanted me to mean anything, he had to risk everything," Adrian said. "I told him I wouldn't be his quiet." Some dramas wrap themselves in velvet to make the fall easier. This one kept the tile floor. It wasn't jealousy that settled under my skin like electricity. It was recognition. I knew the way Nico chewed his lip when he made a decision he hoped he would be proud of later. I knew the way he touched a table with 2 fingers before making an argument. I'd seen his hunger where the face of carefulness so long it had become a mask with a pulse. The elevator opened with a soft chime that sounded like forgiveness rehearsing. Nico stepped into the roof garden in his jacket, the one I liked to pretend I had bought him, hair damp with weather or nerve. He saw me, and that fast, everything unnecessary left his face. He was all arrival. "I told you to come thirsty," he said, squeezing my shoulder as if to test the structure. "I didn't say for what." "You could have called," I said. "You could have told me you were tired of the soft parts of us and wanted something with an edge." "You would have written me a plan," he said. "You would have framed it. I didn't want to be the project." Adrian had gone to the terrace, polite enough to leave us the interior. His reflection stayed in the glass, a third witness we couldn't shoo away without breaking something. Nico put his hand at my back, exactly where it belonged, the way muscle memory can still surprise you. "I kissed him," he said, "the truth like a coin you press into a palm because you owe it and you're done counting. I kissed him twice, once to see if hunger had a different name when it looked like him. Once to see if I could stand the part of me that wanted to be seen by someone who hadn't memorized my corners. Both times I thought of you. Both times I kept going." "That's only a compliment in tragedies," I said, but the line didn't save me. Honesty, when it lands, is not a symmetrical thing. It has a weight on one side. It bruises and makes a kind of logic of itself. "I wanted to choose you, not nostalgia," he said. "I didn't want to come home and perform a memory. I wanted to come home and have it be home." He held my look as if I were a peer and he had decided not to jump. "I thought if you saw him you'd see what I almost broke and what I still want." "What do you want?" I said, and it didn't rise at the end like a question. It fell like a test. "I want to stop being polite with my need," he said. "I want to go home with you and tear a hole in the night big enough to climb through. I want to be forgiven for being a person before I am punished for being a husband. I want to be the man who tells you he was about to lose everything because he couldn't stand not being watched." "You want to be caught before you fall," I said. "I want to be the sort of man who chooses not to fall because he remembers he learned to fly with you," he said. "But I can't stand in the air alone and call that flight." We were already too close for irony. Out on the terrace, Adrian leaned against the glass with his arms crossed like someone who had decided to stand still until the weather chose a direction. He was not the villain. He was the proof. It turns out you can love the person who points toward the edge even if you don't go over. "Come here," I said, and Nico did, his mouth familiar and not, the way water is always the same and always absolutely different. It wasn't public enough to be scandal. It was private enough to be a promise signed in a room not our own. I kissed him like apology and appetite were not enemies. He kissed me back like he'd been waiting for permission to stop being careful. "Now go tell him," I said, when we could breathe again. "Go tell your almost that we are not going to be his future." Nico went, and the two of them stood on the terrace with the city curled around them like a listening animal. I watched his hands do the work his mouth wanted to refuse. He touched Adrian's shoulder once, the briefest "thank you I have ever seen." Adrian nodded, sharp and clean, and then he walked to the elevator without looking back. The glass learned his shape and then forgot it. Nico returned and sat, fever leaving his face in waves. "I'm not a good person in this story," he said. "You're a person," I said. "We make the rest up as we go." We stayed at the bar long enough to outlast the olives. The bartender sent us a glass of water with a lime like a suggestion. When the check arrived tucked into a script page, the line it hid behind was a stage direction. They sit closer than the table requires. I laughed in spite of myself and tipped like I believed in omens. We didn't speak much on the elevator ride down. Sometimes the only way to keep a promise is to keep your mouth shut long enough for your body to catch up. On the sidewalk, he reached for my hand in the way a person does when they want everyone to think it's ordinary and want you to know it is. The night gave us that small mercy. Our faces reflected side by side in shop windows that didn't ask what we'd been doing on a roof. At home, we didn't turn on the big light. My favorite lamp made a bowl of warm on the floor, and we sat in it. The cufflink on the table looked smaller than it had in my palm. I put it in a drawer to return later, which is another word for never, and I felt no shame about that. We didn't make speeches about forgiveness. We touched as if the map were written under the skin and our hands were learning to read again. The edge of his shirt found my wrist. My breath found the place it goes when I stopped telling it what tone to use. Heat arrived the way hunger does when it stops pretending it's anything else. We were not generous, we were accurate. The night made us a room and we signed it with our mouths. There are sentences the body writes without grammar. We used all of them. After the room felt wide, he pressed his forehead to mine and said, "Don't leave," which was funny because neither of us had moved. I folded him into the part of my chest that has doors even when I forget they open. "I owe you better," he said. "You owe me nothing but your want," I said, "and truth before the receipt." We lay there and counted our regrets, then put them under the chair in our heads and did not let them get up. In the morning, the apartment looked like the apartment of people who had finally returned without packing. I made coffee the way he likes it, with a little ceremony and no commentary. He set a square of blue painter's tape on the window and wrote 807 with a pencil like a promise he could erase if he had to, but chose not to. At 7:07 that night, we stood in the blue square and put his hand where it belonged and made a minute behave. At 8:12, we did inventory without prosecuting. At 8:20, water pretended to be champagne and succeeded. We did not rename the furniture. We did not throw away the chair. We left it at the end of the table and let it hold things that were real and heavy and could no longer sit on us. People ask for the villain as if stories owe them one. Some nights the villain is the edge of the bed where you pretend you're asleep. Some nights it's the elevator you don't take. Some nights it's the trolley of what-ifs that clang through your life at 10:22 with a receipt. The truth is that the closest thing to a villain I met was a cufflink with the wrong initials and a man brave enough to leave the room when asked. The rest of the story was two men who decided to stand in a blue square and say where they were. The map was not fancy. The instructions were not difficult. The work was. Tonight at 8:04 there is no calendar joke, just a kitchen timer and a window and a hand that knows its place. If we miss, we will try again at 8:17 and again at 10:10 and again at 11:11 when the world decides to give us the kind of minute that counts twice. I don't know if love is a library book or a map or a stage direction. I know it was waiting under a glass in a bowl by the door, small and heavy and bright, and I am still checking it out before it expires.